Andrew, as we look at the live pictures coming into us of the entrance there to Westminster Abbey, it's going to be a day of pageantry and ceremony like we have never seen before, not in our lifetime, not in my lifetime for sure. How do you feel about it all? I mean, it's a mixture of emotions for me. It's a bit of sadness tinged with sort of pride, patriotism. What about you?
I think that sums it up, actually, Isabel. I was in Green Park again yesterday, just mingling with the crowds. It was incredibly emotional, reading some of those cards and looking at some of those pictures that people had drawn for the Queen. It was hard to fight back the tears, and in fact, I couldn't fight back the tears. And today, I'm incredibly proud that everybody who's anybody in the world has come here to pay tribute to our Queen. But she's our Queen, and as Boris said, and I rather wanted her to go on forever. I wanted her to be not just Elizabeth the Great, Elizabeth the Eternal. And so it's going to be, no doubt about it, the tears will be flowing during that funeral, and it's going to be a remarkable day, and one which will live with us for the rest of our lives, because there's never going to be another monarch who served 70 years on the British throne, head of state of 14 countries. It's an extraordinary record, and I think it's fantastic the way people have come to Britain to pay tribute to her and that record. And of course, a lot of us, we love her, don't we? That's the point about the Queen. We love her. She's part of the family.
Yeah, absolutely.
Andrew, thank you very much indeed. It's going to be. Thank you, Andrew. We'll say goodbye to you. And just adding on to what Andrew was talking about there, I'm just looking at the order of service today, and I think it will be very, very emotional for people, especially as it nears the end of the church service, when the last post will be played, followed by the national anthem, and there is a 2-minute silence.
2-minute silence after that. Yeah, the last post will introduce that 2-minute silence, and I think, hearing Andrew Pearce then talking about how we all wished she could live eternally, Elizabeth the Eternal. Her image, her legacy will be eternal. It will never be forgotten, and that will be a couple of minutes to really reflect on everything that's happened.
Yeah, that's when I think we'll see a few tears being shed.
For sure.
The time is 28 minutes past the hour. There is the order of service that you're seeing, and of course the funeral ceremony gets underway at 11 a.m. Also, actually, leading the coffin when it comes out and heads down here towards the Mall of Buckingham Palace is being led by a troop of Mounties.
Is it?
Yeah, Mounties. Apparently they've got a special association with Her Majesty. So we've seen the lifeguards and all that sort of thing. But now you're going to see Canadian Mounties.
There's so much meaning that's been weaved into everything. When we were talking about the carrying of the coffin into the Abbey, and that's going to be pulled by the Royal Navy. And each of these little ceremonies in themselves pay tribute. Yeah, they're all significant, and it's going to be an amazing day.
Okay. Well, an unseen portrait of the Queen has been released by Buckingham Palace ahead of the state funeral. You like this, Isabel?
I do think it's a lovely photograph, and it's taken when she's looking so fit and well. It was taken in May, just ahead of the Platinum Jubilee and all those celebrations where we showed her just how much we loved her, and in stark contrast really to that last image that we saw of her at Balmoral Castle. But this was her photographed in Windsor Castle.
Prince George and Princess Charlotte will attend the funeral and will walk behind the coffin. The young royals will gather with 2,000 people in Westminster Abbey to remember their late great-grandmother.
Around 6 million people will receive a one-off disability payment from tomorrow. The £150 is to help with costs related to care and mobility needs. The government says most of those eligible should receive the payment by the start of October. Those who qualify will be paid automatically.
Liz Truss has a busy week ahead after normal activity in Parliament paused due to the passing of the Queen. The Prime Minister will meet President Biden at the United Nations General Assembly in New York and set out the government's plans to deal with the energy crisis and the NHS. With the time at 9:30, we should say to you, this is a specially extended edition of Breakfast here on GB News, on television, on radio, online with me, Eamon Holmes, and Isabel Webster. We're on air with you because of today's events until 10 a.m.
Yes, and we can now speak to our very own Alistair Stewart, who's in our London studios this morning for us, and will be speaking for the channel during the funeral, or either side of the funeral, I should say. Good morning to you, Alistair. A huge job today, one that, of course, you're well within your capabilities with, but I'm sure you're feeling a little bit nervous nevertheless.
Yes, it's a remarkable responsibility and a profound honour. And I'm doing homework, as we all do, constantly, and I'm minded of what the Earl Marshal, who's organised it all, the Duke of Norfolk, said. Her Majesty's passing has left many people across many continents with a profound sense of loss. It will be a fitting tribute to an extraordinary reign.
It will be absolutely extraordinary, and just to see the arrivals coming into Westminster Abbey, this is the safest place in the world to be today. If you imagine all the security checks that have been going on, and just seeing people arriving this morning, Alistair, it's going to be a who's who, isn't it?
Well, it is, and I think what's truly extraordinary, apart from the security, is funnily enough, just as I was walking into the studios this morning, there was a German tourist who was staying at the same hotel as me, who was saying how remarkably peaceful and calm it's all been, and how very moving that was, which I thought was actually quite a profound observation from a German citizen, just passing comment on how well these things are done. But it is international. Eamon was talking about the Royal Canadian Mounted Police earlier, and the late Queen had a very, very close relationship with Canada. She once told the United States President at the end of a state visit to the States that she was going home, to Canada. And the 4 horses that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police will be on board are called Elizabeth, not after this Queen, but after her mother, George, Sir John, and Derby. And that word at the end will ring bells for those who know that the late Queen had such an intimate love of all things to do with horses. And one final thought as well on the international nature of what is also a deeply religious, profoundly religious and family affair was President Joe Biden just saying calmly and peacefully last night after signing the Book of Condolence, the world is better for her. What a lovely thing for the President of the United States to say about our late Queen. The world is better for her.
Yeah, and obviously so many people would agree with that, Alistair. We're hearing from London City Hall that all public viewing areas for the funeral procession are now full, so they're not admitting any more people. We don't know exactly what the numbers will be, but you've got to be talking about an extra 1 million people, I suppose, on the route.
I think that's more than likely. I think it was often said of Edward VII that he never realised personally how popular and how loved he was. And I was very taken by what the Prince of Wales, William, said after he and his father, the King, had done that amazing walkabout, chatting to people who'd taken time, up to 24 hours, some of them, to queue just to go into that lying in state and for a few seconds pay their respects with a sign of the cross or open hands or all of those religious symbols. That the Prince of Wales said, she'd never have believed it was going to be like that. And we're just reminding folk of those pictures. So this was a double walkabout. This was the new king and it was his heir. Another thing that you mentioned it earlier, chatting to Isabel, that I do think is genuinely profound, and that is the decision that was taken by the Prince and Princess of Wales that Prince George and Princess Charlotte will indeed join the procession when the coffin has left Westminster Hall, to the left of that picture you're looking at now, and then entered into the great west gate of Westminster Abbey. Those 2 wee ones will be in procession as well, and there they are. I'm not entirely sure what event that is, but there they are. That's the profound image, because in that picture, in green, the late Queen, to her right, her heir and now king, and then to the right of the picture, the right of that picture as well, King Charles's heir apparent, and Prince William's heir apparent. 4 lines of succession, security, arguably the greatest peaceful constitutional gift the late Queen gave to this country.
Yeah.
Those 2 children, George and Charlotte, I mean, they do have an air of seriousness about them.
Especially Prince George.
Yeah. The third one doesn't. What's his name?
Louis, but he's only 4, God love him.
He doesn't, but you can actually tell, Alistair, that the George and Charlotte, a bit like their dad, William, who was always very serious, I think, as a young man, they do have a sense that, you know, they are destined for other things. So this is all part of their training and experience, one would have thought.
Absolutely, and spot on. I mean, this is a day, Eamon and Izzy, of great and profound respect, but the late Queen would have wanted us to have moments of, not levity, but affectionate humour as well. And I did also think last night the fact that Louis isn't going may have been quite an important decision. We do also understand that the final decision that was taken by the Prince and Princess of Wales, William and Catherine, to have them do that was a difficult one, because we will all remember the incredibly difficult decision that was taken about William and Harry walking in procession behind Diana's coffin with Uncle Charlie to the left and their father to the right. And that was very, very difficult. But it was said by Charles Althorp that Earl Spencer, that in his view, those 2 young men you're seeing there as they processed a couple of days ago to join the vigil to their late grandmother, that it was Charles Althorp who said to both of them, if you don't do this, you will regret it for the rest of your life. And I'm not sure whether Prince George is old enough to take that on board, but what I have absolutely no doubt at all, literally no doubt at all, is the profound affection that he felt for Gangan. And you just have to remember those pictures at the Trooping the Colour, where the aircraft went by, and particularly the Red Arrows, which the late Queen utterly adored, just explaining to George, this is what happens, and those are our aeroplanes, and they're doing this for us, and he was just hanging on her every word. Take away everything else, and that's Gangan and a great-grandchild. It's one of those days where we will see profound religiosity from the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Archbishop of York, faith leaders from across the spectrum, but we'll also see a family. We'll have an intimate, respectful glance at the family. And also we will see thousands of people like that, the band of the Royal Marines, Royal Air Force, Royal Navy, and of course the Army, not least in those brilliant scarlet tunics there, the Queen's bodyguard, the Grenadier Guards and others. I heard so many people yesterday and today, they just still refer to her as the boss. Not one person there playing their drums or marching so brilliantly had to be told or ordered to be there today. If anything, they volunteered and they wanted to have one of those important roles, from towing that extraordinary Victorian gun carriage to lining the streets, even to 8 utterly brilliant young men who will have the awesome responsibility of bearing her coffin from the catafalque out of Westminster Hall onto the gun carriage. They are her Army, Navy and Air Force, now his Army, Navy and Air Force, and every one of them will have wanted to be here, and every mum, dad, brother and sister will also remember and cherish this extraordinary day.
Day in history. Alistair, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Talk to you later.
Well, space for up to, yes indeed, and good luck. Space for up to 10,000 people has been created at 3 different locations throughout Manchester to view live coverage of the Queen's funeral.
Let's go to our Northwest of England reporter. That's Sophie Reaper, and she's going to give you the atmosphere from Manchester. Sophie.
Good morning to you both. Well, as you can see, the weather here in Manchester has turned a little bit grim, but it hasn't put people off completely. People are still coming out in dribs and drabs with umbrellas and ponchos. They're making use of the trees where we're stood. We're at one of the 3 locations where the funeral will be screened today across Manchester city centre. And just one of those people who have come out for the funeral is a huge fan of the royal family, Julie Dickinson. She joins me now. Come under here, Julie. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Tell me why you've come out to Manchester today. Why are you bearing the rain?
I just love the royal family. I had to come and pay my respects. I couldn't get to Manchester. Sorry to London, but I had to be here today. And just, like I say, for respect.
And have you been a fan of the royal family your entire life?
I have, yes. My parents were, and my husband's ex-army. My brothers are all ex-army, so the Queen was their boss. We've got to show you respect.
And what does being here for the funeral, what does it mean to you to be able to come together with other like-minded people from Manchester to pay your respects to our late Queen?
I just think it's just a pleasure knowing that she's going to be put at rest at last. I mean, I just can't put words into it. It makes me feel sad, but that's just how I feel. I just hope other people celebrate it. It's a celebration of her life as well. So.
Do you think after today the nation will feel almost a sense of peace that the Queen is finally being laid to rest and ready to embrace King Charles III as our next monarch?
Yeah, I mean, I hope they will. I mean, I'm going to try my best to accept him. I had a bit of a off-ish with him, but I'm getting to like him now. Well, that's just how the way life is. I mean, he is our king after all.
And tell me about the Queen. She was on the throne for 70 years. Is there anything that makes you particularly think of the Queen? Any memories that you have of her?
Just everything about her, really. I mean, she was such a beautiful lady. Like everyone says, she's like your grandma. She is. She's like a granny to you all. She was polite. She was dressed nice. Her outfits were beautiful. It's just how I don't really know what else to say about her. She's just a gorgeous lady. It's a sad, sad day today.
Well, hopefully the weather will get a little bit brighter. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Julie. We're hoping that the rain will dry up a little bit for the people of Manchester today as they come together in mourning, but also, as Julie said, to celebrate the life of our monarch of 70 years.
No idea. Sophie, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Around 2 million people back here in London have gathered today to pay their final respects. We hear that all public viewing galleries are now full. We're hearing that from the authorities in London, and they say, obviously don't bother travelling in. Because there's no public viewing areas left, and that shows you. So I hope you're getting some sort of sense of the gathering here, of people gathering. And these are live pictures coming in. These ceremonial marches going on around London, and the various regiments all paying all the sense of occasion here, because it certainly is. People have come to see this pomp and splendour, and they're not going to be disappointed.
Yeah, and I really do hope people heed that warning from London City Hall now that all public viewing areas are full. People will be disappointed if they do decide to set off now. They won't be able to make their way into any of the viewing areas, so please do heed that warning.
So maybe we'll have some chance of hearing what the bands are playing. I don't know if we can or not, but to add the atmosphere to you. Oh no, apparently we've got no audio on those things. We see the pictures and we see and we enjoy all of this. And out and about we've had various reporters talking about what is happening. And right now we are going to be joined by one of them who has seen.
Well, actually, what we're going to do now, we're going to listen to the tribute that was made yesterday evening by Queen Consort Camilla, with touching memories of their long and enduring relationship.
Well, she was very, it was very fitting, it was very tender listening to Camilla, who incidentally we can call Queen Camilla after today, after the Queen is in charge. In charge is the word, and we'll be able to hear from her and to call her, not Queen Consort, but we can call her legitimately the Queen, because that is what Queen Elizabeth II actually wanted to happen. There's a whole complete security blanket all around London, and we're wondering now, once you get in, you can't really get out.
No, exactly. Tightest security anywhere in the world, I'd imagine, happening in the capital at the moment. And as you can see on that live picture, that's the entrance there to the nave of Westminster Abbey, and people arriving now thick and fast, just over an hour until the funeral starts, and as the camera pans across, increasing numbers of people arriving. Well, we can speak now to our fellow GB News presenter, Nigel Farage, who joins us here at Buckingham Palace. Welcome to the programme, Nigel. What a momentous day. We've never seen anything like it, have we?
Yeah, truly momentous. The security operation is extraordinary.
Yeah.
If you're coming from south of the river, all the bridges are closed, you have to walk. I discovered that.
Oh, right, okay.
That's just a little tip for people: get on the train if you are coming up. It's profoundly sad. The whole thing's been profoundly sad. And I worried with the passing of the Queen, would we see the passing of the values that she represented? Unashamedly Christian, duty, service, honour. And
You could argue, Nigel, that they're reinforced because they've been brought out into the open and people have witnessed and seen, and the country has seen, and all the naysayers and doubters have seen, there's an appetite for this monarchy.
Absolutely. That's why I say I'm profoundly sad and yet hugely encouraged by what I've seen over the course of the last few days, and very interesting. So many of our young people, we were told, well, they don't like the monarchy anymore. Well, goodness me, the response amongst huge numbers of young people has been remarkable. And also we're told that somehow the monarchy is divisive. The number of people I've met just this morning from ethnic minorities talking about their home country they came from originally, the Commonwealth, what she represented to them. So no, I'm actually very encouraged by what's happening.
Why do you think that is, Nigel? What was it that Her Majesty managed to encapsulate that captured multi-generational affection? And what lessons, I suppose, can be learned from that for King Charles, for the Prince of Wales going forward?
We've learned for the first time in our lives what a constitutional monarchy actually is. We didn't know because we'd taken it for granted because she'd been there the whole of the time. We're re-examining, we're rediscovering our history, our traditions, and we're realising actually having a head of state who is not either currently in politics or has never been in politics is a very, very good unifying thing, bringing people together from ages, classes, different political beliefs. So no, I think the magic of monarchy is actually back.
Well, that's absolutely key, isn't it? I think somebody did a survey of the crowds leading up to Westminster Hall. It was about 52% Conservative, which you might be surprised, you might have thought it would be a higher percentage, but as you say, they sort of spanned the political spectrum.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, had that Lion state gone on for a fortnight, millions would have passed. A lot of people just simply couldn't do it or couldn't afford the time. But again, and I walked down that line the other day talking to people. I mean, very moving. People with their own personal stories. And isn't it funny? We saw this with Diana's funeral too. We almost live our lives through them. Their successes, their tragedies remind us of similar things that have happened in our lives too.
She also knew, Nigel, and there may be a lesson in this for the rest of us, that by not giving an opinion, people couldn't hate her one way or the other because they didn't know what she thought. And this is what social media has done. Of course, it puts all of us, they give an opinion, and you're either for that opinion or against that opinion, which leads to the country being quite divisive, or not. But she was above opinion.
Oh yeah, above politics in every way.
Yeah.
And that's the little bit of magic that works. And I think, we'll see how Charles gets on as king in Australia and elsewhere. But I mean, I just feel, and I've been rather critical in the past of him, I have to be honest, for some of his political campaigns, but I think he's off to a heck of a good start.
Yes.
I think there is a tide of goodwill behind him and the family. And when you think, we have to grieve in our lives, but they've got to do it in public, including today, a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old. I mean, goodness gracious me, when you think about it, we ask an awful lot of them.
Yeah, we do. In a goldfish bowl always, but they always deliver, don't they? They always make us so proud.
What we want to see is they're hurting like we are. It means something to them, and if they at that level are human and they hurt, then they're like everyone else, aren't they?
Yes, they're human and they hurt, and yet, can you imagine at a time of grief you've lost a parent or a grandparent being asked to march through the streets of London with an estimated global audience of 4 billion people? It's a heck of a thing.
Well, do you know, we talk about the children in all of this, but actually for me, I've worried the most about King Charles, because it was in the immediate aftermath of his mother's shock death, because we understand that she was having dinner the night before and was in good spirits, that he was then off and doing this tour, symbolising his, commitment to the crown. But also I did worry about his own, chance to grieve, and I worry more about him than the children.
I'm going to remember that King's speech as long as I live. I mean, you can see the personal pain that he was in, and yet he did it. He delivered it. The words were amazing. I thought that was absolutely incredible. Again, you see, we thought the King's speech was a film. We're learning all these things.
Yeah, we are.
But it's been the longest apprenticeship in history, basically, and he proved straight away that he hadn't been wasting his time. He was ready for this. He was going to show that he was the king. He is the man. He is Charles III. He is the future.
God save the King.
God save the king. Nigel, thank you.
Thank you very much
indeed. Really appreciate that. Final preparations are underway. We should also say we're looking at Westminster Abbey there, but we're going to go to Windsor, where there will be a second service where the Queen will actually be buried. It's called a committal service later today. To explain more, our reporter Ellie Costello, who's in Windsor.
Yes, good morning to you both. There's been a hub of activity here at Victoria Barracks in Windsor. Just behind me on this square, rehearsals were taking place until just a few moments ago, trying to make this afternoon absolutely perfect. We just walked through and seen musicians also rehearsing for that procession later on this afternoon. I can smell the smell of cooked breakfast as well. Soldiers obviously preparing themselves for a very busy day ahead. Lots of preparations. It is a hub of activity, and I expect we're going to see really moving scenes for that procession up the Long Walk later. So let's get some details on some of those now. I want to bring in now Captain Tom Melville, who is Adjutant of the 1st Battalion of the Coldstream Guards. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. So, Captain Tom, what can we expect in Windsor this afternoon on the Long Walk?
So from 15:10, it will be when Her Majesty, the procession, steps off from Shore Farm Gate, and the Long Walk will be lined from where the A308 crosses the Long Walk up to the Cambridge Gate by a tri-service street lining of Royal Navy, Royal Air Force and the Army. And the sector commander for that is the commanding officer of the 1st Battalion Coldstream Guards, and I'll be the sector adjutant, will be mounted. And they'll be at 9 paces extend the whole way down the Long Walk. There'll then be a short gap, and then the route for inside the castle down St George's Chapel will be lined by 1st Battalion Coldstream Guards and 1st Battalion Welsh Guards. And they're at 4 paces extend, so much closer. So plenty of soldiers, airmen and sailors on parade today.
And there has been so much preparation in preparation for this. I mean, how long has this been going on? How many rehearsals have taken place?
Yeah, so rehearsals have been happening every day. There's been an overnight rehearsal in Windsor, an overnight rehearsal in London, but every day for the last 10 days there have been rehearsals of some kind taking place. We're, in a way, the 1st Battalion Coldstream Guards, we're lucky that we've been on state ceremonial and public duties for the last couple of years, so we were involved in the Platinum Jubilee a couple of months ago. But no, it's been an amazing effort from everybody, including the sort of logistics, as you touched on earlier, the chefs and all the supporting elements.
And tell us about the Coldstream Guards, because so many people would be familiar with you and your bearskins. How significant is it that you're taking part in this ceremony? Because one of your key roles is to protect the monarchy, isn't it?
No, absolutely, and the whole battalion from the moment that Her Majesty passed away has just been, it's a huge honour for us to be involved. And as you say, many people spend many hours guarding Her Majesty at Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace, and to be able to sort of be there and play a small part in her final journey back into Windsor, it means a huge amount to the battalion.
And it must be a huge amount of discipline as well. I mean, you touched on there the hours that go into this and protecting the monarchy, and I can't imagine this is very light, this bearskin.
This actually is very light. But no, the kit's, it's not the comfiest. But no, I think, of course, it takes a huge amount of discipline whenever anyone's on parade. But I think the overriding feeling in everyone's heads today will just be of pride in being able to, as I say, be involved in today in such a momentous occasion.
Do you think it will be very moving for all of you who are involved in this procession this afternoon?
Of course, I think absolutely, but I think that certainly over the last 10 days, and we've explained to the battalion that now is not our time to be mourning and feeling anything like that. So we've got a job to do today, but of course it will be very moving for everybody involved.
Captain Tom Elver, really, really good to speak to you today, and good luck with this afternoon. Not that you need it, you've been preparing for a very long time for this moment. Thank you very much. Well, there you go. Preparations still very much underway here in Victoria Barracks. We will continue to see that hub of activities. You can see a little bit behind me as they prepare for that procession this afternoon. 3:10. That will begin on the Long Walk in Windsor. It's a 3-mile walk, and they will take the best part of an hour to get up to St George's Chapel in Windsor, where we'll see that committal service where Queen Elizabeth II will be finally laid to rest with her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip.
Right, you read that a little bit.
Ellie, thank you very much indeed.
That was the scene at Windsor. Here from Buckingham Palace, coverage of the Queen's funeral will be live throughout GB News, throughout the whole channel, television and radio, from 11 o'clock with Alistair Stewart. We'll say goodbye to you and we'll leave you with this thought from GB News viewer Natalie. May God continue to comfort, unite and protect His Majesty King Charles III and family in this time of sorrow. May Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II rest in perfect peace. And that's a sentiment we would echo on this very special day, on this historic day.
Yeah, absolutely that. And I suppose God save the King. We'll be back tomorrow morning from 6 a.m. But for now, we'll leave you with our political editor, Darren McCaffrey.
Yeah, very good morning to you, Eamon and Isabel. Not only is the security pretty tight there in central London around Buckingham Palace and Westminster Abbey, but also here in West London as well. We've seen a whole range of world leaders arriving here this morning. They're arriving here because they're having to get on coaches to travel to that service at Westminster Abbey, such as the logistical problems and challenges that's been presented to the Metropolitan Police and to authorities today. In the last couple of minutes, the King of Spain and the Queen of Denmark have arrived here at Royal Chelsea Barracks. The Queen of Denmark now is the longest serving monarch in Europe. Also the King of the Belgians arriving, as well as the Queen of Norway as well. But it's not just members of royal families from across the world who are attending the service, but indeed presidents and prime ministers too. The Irish Taoiseach arrived a little earlier on this morning, as did the head of the European Union, the Commission there, Ursula von der Leyen, the German president, the Italian president. I could go on and on, hundreds and hundreds of dignitaries arriving to attend that service. I think as Emmanuel Macron, the French president, who's also here in London, eloquently put it in the day that followed the Queen's death, that he said that the Queen was not just your Queen, as in the Queen of the United Kingdom, but she was the Queen to the rest of the world. And that is certainly why so many of them have turned up here today to pay their respects at Westminster Abbey. She had an incredibly long reign, 70 years on the throne. She's known many of these leaders, not just for years, but for decades. And even she's known not just the leaders, but also the parents of some of the leaders. Look at Justin Trudeau. She remembered and knew his dad when his dad was the Canadian Prime Minister. Now Justin Trudeau, is the Prime Minister. But it does present, as I say, a security challenge. That's why they're having to come here to West London to get on those coaches. It doesn't apply to everyone, mind you. For example, President Joe Biden, the US President, he is still getting his cavalcade to Westminster Abbey, such as his prominence. But also, it's not just the security situation, it's the diplomatic niceties, if you like, as well. That seating plan inside the Abbey is incredibly complicated. Where do you put world leaders? The Emperor of Japan, is he more senior than the New Zealand Prime Minister, for example, even though Jacinda Ardern is the head of a country in which the British monarch is the head of state? And that is why the Foreign Office would have had to deal with, as I say, these challenges of diplomacy to make sure that they don't mess things up or cause a diplomatic incident with the many world leaders who have gathered here today. And it is a day for not just us here in the UK, in the four constituent parts, but also for people around the world, because as we were suggesting, it will not just be watched by tens of millions of people across Great Britain, but by billions of people around the world. This really is a moment in which the world's the people across the world will be watching London and watching us say our final goodbye to Queen Elizabeth II.
Good morning and welcome. You're watching and listening to GB News with me, Alistair Stewart, and Anne Diamond, and our excellent guests. This is an intimate family gathering, played out before the world. It is the funeral of a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother, attended by world leaders. It is the Constitution, the succession, played out in public, with a reading from her Prime Minister. And it's deeply religious, as was the late Queen.
There are, of course, nods to tradition. There are psalms and bidding prayers that have been heard at state funerals well over 2 centuries, probably. But there is newness as well. We're going to see lots of things happening for the first time, including the royal children marching in solemn procession behind the coffin of the late Queen, our monarch, their Gangan. And it's an offering of thanks, of course, from her subjects. Hundreds of thousands have queued to pay their respects at the vigil. Hundreds of thousands more are lining the streets of London and Windsor.
The state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II will begin at 11 a.m., her coffin having been carried in procession from her lying in state in Westminster Hall, in her Palace of Westminster, at 10:45 to the Abbey. Well, as I said earlier, with us in the studio are panel of experts, the historian, Professor David Starkey, sitting here, and at the end as well, you saw him earlier on our breakfast coverage, Rafe Heddle-Mankoo. We'd also like to hear from you, your reflections, but we will only share them once the service is over at around midday.
Yes,
you
you'll be able
are
to
watching GB News.
Exactly. You'll be able to watch everything. We will bring it all to you. And then we'd love to hear what you're thinking this morning, what you are going through. You know how to get in touch with us, don't you, in the usual way. gbviews@GB News.
I'm going to start by turning to my good friend David Starkey for some context here. And it's Westminster Abbey, of course, but it hasn't been at Westminster Abbey for a very long time. This is a place called a Royal Peculiar as a church that means more to her, perhaps, than any other centre of faith.
Not, I think, maybe Windsor. Windsor is the most personal. What this is, Westminster is the embodiment of the head of the monarch, a supreme governor of the church, head of the Church of England, the political and temporal head of the Church of England. It's also, of course, Alistair, that puts it coldly. That puts it in formal terms. It is the cradle. It's arguably the birthplace of monarchy, and it's the burial place of monarchy. It centres on the body. It centres on the shrine of Edward the Confessor,
yes,
the last Anglo-Saxon king, and then arrayed round it there are all the tombs of the great medieval kings.
And also deeply personal, because it's where she married the late Duke of Edinburgh.
And where she was crowned. Where she was crowned. So it's a place of passionate association for her. But also, you put it brilliantly at the beginning, dare I say, Alistair, occasionally having teased you. But Westminster has not actually played this role. What makes Westminster different, of course, is with the popular democratic monarchy, it is in the heart of the capital. And it's only really from the moment of the democratization of Britain and the monarchy from 1917 that you get all royal ceremonies, beginning with weddings, coming to the Abbey. And this is the culmination. What we're seeing now is the People's Queen.
What we're also seeing now on screen is the Beast. The convoy carrying President Joe Biden and his wife Jill and a panoply of other people, not least security guards. I think I'm right in saying, Anne, that he's the only one who's allowed to have his own personal transport.
As far as
the others,
we know,
bless their hearts, are in buses.
In the buses, yes, that's right. As far as we know, he is the only one who's being allowed his own transport. And you can see what a logistical nightmare the whole thing is anyway, but we're now seeing him wend his way very slowly into Parliament Square from the Houses of Parliament.
I love that image there as well, a Metropolitan Police outrider and the drums and pipes of the Scottish, Irish and Household Division soldiers there. If you want security, President Biden, you've got it.
Which one is the beast? I mean, there are so many of them there. Is it that huge one?
No, it's 1, 2, 3, here it comes. It's either that one or there's another.
Yeah.
For security reasons, there are two identical beasts.
Oh, I see.
But there's the seal on the back door, so I'm guessing that's probably the one.
Favouring, yes. And now we're going into Parliament Square. Are we at Parliament? I'm just trying to figure out where we are.
Yes.
Margaret.
Going round, yes, going round towards the Abbey.
Just to pick up on something, David Starkey, which is so brilliant, interjecting there, just saying St Margaret's. Between the Palace of Westminster and the great Westminster Abbey is a stunningly beautiful little church, St Margaret's, and it's the MP's church. And pride of place in that church, with one of those lovely little plaques that one has on a seat in a church, is Mr Speaker. If there is a parliamentary event taking place in that church, Mr Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, takes pride of precedence.
The President is in the back of that car. It looks like Joe Biden and his wife Jill, who are arriving now, Rafe, yes?
St Margaret is also where Churchill was married in 1908, and Churchill was, of course, the one who had the last state funeral in this country in 1965.
Isn't this an expression of brute power? And isn't the contrast so absolute?
I don't know, I think...
I'm going to echo back to something I said earlier when I was talking to Eamon and Isabel, and that is the strange conversation I had with the German tourists this morning, that we can do this in a relatively understated way. The President of the United States, yes, of course, he has his own close protection unit, but there he is, he steps out and he makes his way alongside so many other world leaders to join the congregation in Westminster Abbey. And his profound words, I thought, last night, after he'd signed the book of condolences to the late Queen, he paid a brief, moving tribute and ended by saying, "The world is better for her."
Which, as you say, is very understated, but it's very simple and beautiful.
And on the left there is David Hoyle, who's the Dean of Westminster. He'll be conducting the service. The Archbishop of Canterbury, as it were, the senior cleric in the Church of England, and David is quite right that the head of the Church of England is the monarch, but the senior cleric, Justin Welby, will be giving the sermon, and also the Archbishop of York, the second most senior priest, vicar, call them what you will, in the church, is also making a contribution. Heads bowed from the Household Division as that party goes in, escorted by David Hoyle.
And if you've just joined us and you're wondering what it is that we're watching now and what's going to pan out over the next few hours, we're watching all these dignitaries, members of other royal households and foreign leaders. They're all arriving now, bit by bit, into Westminster Abbey. But what is it now? 8 minutes past 10. We are told that it will be 10:44 when the procession will start, bringing the Queen's coffin from Westminster Hall to the Abbey that you're looking at now.
And there are the heralds, pursuivants, kings of arms, and they have a vital role, one of them does, later on at the end of the day when in Windsor, when this extraordinary global event narrows down to family, religion and constitution, where the Lord Chamberlain's wand is broken, the sovereign's colour of the Queen's Guard is handed back to the Queen, the crown, orb and sceptre are removed from the coffin and placed upon the altar. And David?
The titles of the Queen are proclaimed in a loud voice by Garter, King of Arms, the most excellent and whatever princess, concluding, I think, with Sovereign of the Order of the Garter. And this is the moment at which the monarch becomes the body of any other Christian. The crown has gone, the orb has gone, the sceptre has gone, the robe has gone, everything is gone. and she's simply anybody who is dead.
There is a line in one of the hymns in the order of service which we were all talking about before we came in, and it says, "Lord, thy throne shall never, like the earth's proud empires, pass away." That is a remarkable scene, and we are just holding on it for a moment. So from the bottom left-hand corner of your picture, just going across there, the late Queen and now the King's armed services, soldiers, sailors, marines, and at the far end on the right, the Royal Air Force. To the top right-hand corner of your picture, the mass bands, there's a close-up shot of the Royal Air Force, and how brilliantly well the RAF Regiment, the Colour Squadron of the Royal Air Force, did in these ceremonies and these events over the last few days. And there on the other side of the road, members of the Royal Marines band. All along the way, there will be what they call liners, soldiers, sailors and airmen simply lining the street in tribute. And also, while David was just finishing there, you heard the sounding of Big Ben. There are two important soundings of bells today. In London, Big Ben will sound on the minute, and then when they get to Windsor, the bells of Sevastopol and others will greet the coffin, and then the minute bell will also sound as well. These are the traditions that Anne referred to at the very beginning of the show. Where we think it appropriate, we'll mention it in passing. We won't over-labour it. We just want you to know what is going on, because we know to you, each and every individual one of you, this is a day that matters, and we want you never to forget it.
What is extraordinary as well about watching these pictures, and if you're listening on the radio, we're seeing these amazing ancient historic buildings of London that normally have so many crowds of people in front of them and buses and queues of people going about their business. Suddenly today, so many roads are empty. Many roads in central London have been closed, of course.
Yeah.
And we're seeing these ancient buildings at their historic best, almost. Aren't we?
What's remarkable, though, this front of the Abbey that we all think of as ancient is only the beginning of the 18th century. They only finish it then. The work of the Abbey goes from the 13th century to the 16th century, and then finally, in the reign of Queen Anne, the great towers go up.
And the building is still under evolution. The niches above the Great West Hall there were empty until the year 2000, when they were filled with statues of 20th century martyrs, including Martin Luther King Jr.
Rafe, let me take you back 1,000 years, as is my wont occasionally, and before David Starkey does it. Before it became Westminster, this was Thorney Island, and there was a church there way back. And what has emerged on Thorney Island now to become Westminster is an extraordinary statement of monarchy and constitutional monarchy, because you have in that small area, less than a square mile, the Royal Palace of Westminster, just down the way from what was Whitehall, Queen Elizabeth's palace, and Henry VIII's palace, and then you have Westminster Abbey. It is church and state, it is democracy and monarchy in one special part of London.
Hugely and uniquely so, and you're quite right to mention the connection between church, parliament and crown, because it was in the chapter house of Westminster Abbey that the origins of parliament, to parle, to speak, occurred. The octagonal room where the priests and monks would sit and discuss, and that created the precedent for what we now know to be the House of Commons. And of course, the Palace of Westminster remains a royal palace. The Westminster Hall is the one.
I was going to say, it's a great shot of Westminster Hall there, the oldest bit that survived not one, not two, but 3 fires, and there it still sits, and that indeed is where the vigil was conducted, and the late Queen lay in state.
On May the 10th, 1941, London suffered one of its heaviest bombing raids a year after Churchill came to power, and the Commons was bombed, and the roof of Westminster Hall caught fire. A former cabinet minister happened to be around late at night, ran over to the fire service, who said, "We can only save one of the two." And I think they quite rightly chose to let the Commons burn and save this most historic space in the country.
And that is where the Queen has been lying in state now for 4 or 5 days, and so many people have filed past. I'm sure you've got family members who've done the same thing. My youngest son suddenly got there as fast as he could yesterday when they said we're about to close the queue, and he got there and he bowed and he had his moment with the Queen. And so many people have done that. They've been stalwart. They've queued for up to 13, 14 hours in some instances. Now that queuing is over, and the Queen is very privately now being transferred and will be transferred onto the gun carriage so that the ceremony will take place as they process up to the Abbey. That is happening at 10:44. As ever, these things are run to the minute, aren't they? More people arriving still at Westminster Abbey.
I think that might be Mark Drakeford, the First Minister of Wales, on the left. I'm afraid I don't know who the first two are. We get brilliant briefings from the palace and from the office of the Earl Marshal, but the timings of the arrivals, it is. There's nothing worse than the back of a head when it comes to commentating.
So people are still arriving there at Westminster Abbey.
And it was I have just been told, which is very helpful, that I was on the right money because it was Mark Drakeford, but just ahead of him was Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland.
So more arrivals at Westminster Abbey, and as I said, later after the funeral service, there will be another full procession which will go past Buckingham Palace.
Yeah.
And so for anyone who's there, and of course there are huge crowds at Buckingham Palace.
Just before you go to Buckingham Palace, and just pause on that picture, that something very nice and touching, and whether it's intentional or not, I have no idea. But in that greeting party at the Great West Door, 2 women in army uniform, the late Queen, the only woman to have served in full uniform when she was old enough and joined the army. That's a civic dignitary with a great chain of office.
That is the Lord Mayor of Westminster.
Lord Mayor of Westminster. I'm grateful, David. Thank you very much. And I interrupted you. We were going to Buckingham Palace.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, it's very difficult to know where is the most interesting to look at the moment, but more dignitaries arriving at Westminster Abbey. But people assembled around Buckingham Palace will get a wonderful view of the procession later on after the service. Shall we go live to Buckingham Palace right now? Because GB News' Home and Security Editor, Mark White, is waiting. Hello, Mark. Hi. Nothing happening there yet, but it will.
Good morning, yes. Well, there is quite a bit of activity here, actually.
We completely
Passing here, maybe heading to Clarence House to pick up the King and other senior members of the royal family, because according to our notes very kindly provided to us by the Palace and the Ministry of Defence, the royal party is expected to depart from Buckingham Palace. So not only will people get the opportunity to see the solemn procession when the Queen's body borne on that gun carriage is processed from Westminster Abbey, up Whitehall, across Horseguards, down the Mall and round here up to the Wellington Arch, but they will also get the opportunity to see the King, the Queen, other senior royal members leaving.
Mark, forgive me. The Prime Minister has, the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson and another former Prime Minister David Cameron and their wives are just arriving at the Abbey. I apologise for shouting over you there, but I know folk at home, because of this back of the head problem, may not have recognised it, but that's Boris and Carrie Johnson and David and Sam Cameron just arriving there to take their place. And Theresa May is also in that arrival pack with her husband Philip. So they are gathering there, and there's still Gordon Brown to come and Tony Blair, of that extraordinary grouping of prime ministers who are still alive and kicking. Liz Truss is the late Queen's 15th Prime Minister. So for someone who not only had Winston Churchill as her first Prime Minister, Liz Truss as her last, is also a woman, I've always found it quite extraordinary, who would have known and I'm sure met with Clement Attlee as well, one of the truly great Labour Prime Ministers as well, a woman we pay our respects to today, who's Joe Biden and Justin Trudeau also both said, and there indeed is Gordon Brown arriving, knew them all, understood them all, and knew more about their business than many of them did.
And worth noting also that almost all of the Commonwealth realm Prime Ministers will also be in attendance. There are 4 or 5 Canadian Prime Ministers coming, and here we see Tony Blair also arriving now, along with John Major. So this is all timed perfectly to have an entire
Did you just see that?
I don't know what the collective noun is for a group of Prime
Blair
Ministers.
to Major.
Gaggle of Prime Ministers.
It is the sort of day where those two parties who were at each other's throats for 2 decades, today is a day that says, leave it all outside, thank you. And Tony Blair extends the hand of friendship to John Major as he and Norma on the left also enter, and a smile and a greeting there from David Hoyle, the Dean of Westminster.
It's difficult to know, isn't it, whether to take our focus off Westminster Abbey at the moment and have another go at with the scenes at Buckingham Palace. Shall we try and see if we can get Mark back, GB News' Home and Security Editor? Mark, tell us what's happening at Buckingham Palace, very briefly, if you would.
Well, and we saw another motorcade just passing us, heading up to the Abbey. Of course, these dignitaries, world leaders arriving before the royal party, who, as we understand it, will be assembling here at Buckingham Palace before then making that journey by vehicle up to Westminster Abbey. Because, of course, we know once the funeral service is over, the senior members of the royal family will then process on foot behind the coffin and the gun carriage as it makes its way from that area down here, of course, to Buckingham Palace and up towards Wellington Arch. There are so many people now who have come to central London that the Mayor's office has said that all of the viewing areas in central London are now full. Terribly disappointing, of course, for those who are arriving a little bit later, but actually they were full by 9 o'clock this morning. They were expecting huge numbers to come to try to get a glimpse of the late monarch's procession, to pay their respects, and true to those predictions, there are massive crowds all around central London now for this event, which we have not seen the likes of since the state funeral of Sir Winston Churchill back in 1965. You can see down the Mall there. The Mall itself, of course, cannot be full of people because it needs to be kept clear for that procession and all of the motorcades carrying world leaders and VIPs up towards Westminster Abbey for this service.
Mark, there's also, you were talking about the helpful briefings from the likes of the Ministry of Defence and the Metropolitan Police. Where you are, there's an interesting pecking order for the arrival of the royals, because it is, in a curious way, a motorcade reflection of the line of succession, and therefore I'm assuming that the King and Queen Consort will be the last to take that journey as they leave where you are, or Clarence House, also on the Mall, and head for Westminster Abbey.
Yes, I mean, that's certainly the process that we see in other state occasions, where the most important are always the last to arrive. So we expect that same protocol will be followed on this occasion. You've seen quite a few motorcades that are pulling up at Westminster Abbey, another one here. We are also seeing buses, multiple buses. We had a sort of taster of that last last night here at Buckingham Palace for this state reception, where about a dozen buses or so carrying world leaders and other VIPs arrived at Buckingham Palace, and they will enact that same security procedure. It's done, Alistair, purely for practical reasons. There's just no way that they could have motorcades for individual world leaders. Yes, the US President gets one. Yes, the former Prime Ministers of the United Kingdom, some members of royal families from around the world will get motorcades, but many of these world leaders will just have to crowd together on these buses and be escorted in. It's the safest way to do it with the numbers that are expected to arrive. 500 world leaders and VIPs from across the globe, along with the 1,500 or so other people who will be attending this state funeral.
Very much indeed. Obviously, we will await those buses here as we are watching the entrance to Westminster Abbey. That must have been Liz Truss who was just last in.
I thought it was.
Liz Truss.
That was Liz Truss with her
by
husband.
Simon Case as well, the Cabinet
Yes.
Secretary.
Yes, that's right. So even the serving Prime Minister has now arrived. What comes next? If Mark has just been seeing these various dignitaries' buses coming past Buckingham Palace and wending their way here to Westminster Abbey, who will they be, I wonder?
Yeah. The crowned heads of Europe, I think.
Yes.
I think.
It makes sense that the Prime Ministers and other people like that would arrive first, and then maybe royalty.
But in a bus.
In a bus, I know.
It isn't the funeral of Edward VII when they rode behind the coffin. Was it, Rafe, is it 9 kings and the German Emperor?
That's right.
9 kings and the German Emperor rode behind the coffin, preceded by his dog, preceded by the dog Caesar.
More than half of them related to Queen Victoria.
Indeed, probably all of them.
This motorcade looks as though it's coming from Clarence House.
It is, I was just thinking exactly
and
that.
The car's got the standard in front. He must be the king.
Now, who will be in that car?
It must be the king.
It's, the King and Queen Consort, we think, because of the standard that's flying from it. But we'll get a closer look.
But they will then be going to Westminster Hall.
Indeed, yeah.
To the Abbey.
Anne is right to point that out to you, and the time is now 26 and a half minutes past 10, but just so long as you know exactly what is occurring.
There isn't a standard.
And that is that at around 10:35, 10:40, the focus of attention will indeed